In today's video, we're going to be ranking every NBA Western Conference team. Like I said in the East version, if you haven't checked that out, watch that after this. But it is a guarantee that I at least get some things wrong in this video. But everybody else will too, that's the fun of it, they're just predictions. But before we get into it, please be sure to hit the like button and subscribe. I'm a small channel just trying to grow, thank you very much. To start off the video with the most obvious 15th seed in NBA history, I have the Utah Jazz as the 15th seed in the Western Conference. I believe we're at a point with basketball where even the worst teams in the NBA still have some absurdly talented players. So I'm not gonna lie and act like the Jazz are just completely devoid of any potential or talent, because they're not. They have one of the best young centers in the league in Walker Kessler, already a dominant rebounder and one of the best shot blockers in the NBA, who is on the last year of his rookie contract, and I believe the Jazz should extend him. There comes to a point where even for rebuilding teams, you still have to have some level of continuity and competitiveness. But if you're gonna keep anyone on this roster around long term, Walker Kessler should be him. You also have recently extended Lauri Markkanen, who you acquired in the Donovan Mitchell trade. Lauri in his first season with the Utah Jazz averaged 25 points per game on almost 50-40 shooting splits. He looked like a bona fide star for the Jazz. But since then, his numbers have only dipped and his efficiency hit a career low last season, albeit with him only playing 47 games and the Jazz obviously tanking and resting him for more games than he really needed to be. So you kind of just gotta hope that Lauri Markkanen takes advantage of being on yet again one of the worst rosters in the NBA and getting his numbers back to where they were in 2023, potentially providing some life and hope in this Jazz team, or just becoming a solid trade asset for them. Either which way you view Lauri Markkanen long term, you just pray he has a bounce back season this year. I do want to give a shout out to the lesser known players on the Jazz roster who just don't get a lot of coverage in general. Isaiah Collier, who was their late first round pick in 2024, actually showed some promise towards the tail end of the season. He averaged 9 points per game and 6 assists on the year. He could for sure be a rotational player for your team. Kyle Filipowski, whose rookie season definitely flew under the radar, he averaged 10 points per game, shooting 50% from the field and 35% from three, along with 6 rebounds as a rookie is really good for a big man. There's definitely something to work on and develop there, and he could be a solid backup to Walker Kessler for the next 5 years. Bryce Sensabaugh is another victim of the Jazz lack of media coverage, because he was one of the more efficient shooters in the league last year, shooting 42.5% from three, along with 11 points and 3 rebounds a night in only 20 minutes a game. Definitely another guy to watch out for this season. I think there's definitely something there, and I must give a shout out to Taylor Hendricks, who suffered one of the nastiest injuries I've ever seen. Only 3 games into his season last year, he still has a load of potential, and I pray he gets back on the court in 100% health this year. But the big story for the Jazz this offseason was when they drafted Ace Bailey 5th overall, when it was abundantly clear that Ace Bailey had no plans on going to Utah. Since arriving in Utah though, Ace Bailey has showed nothing but gratitude and thankfulness, so I don't think there's really anything to worry about there. I think he'll be a great Utah Jazz, and I cannot wait to see how he plays in year 1. I'm gonna be tuning into Jazz games just to see how this guy plays. So hopefully he can bring some fun and excitement to Utah, but unfortunately, I still have them as the 15th seed overall in the West. Like I said, this roster is not devoid of talent. There is definitely some promise with some of these guys, but at the end of the day, the Western Conference is absolutely stacked, and I really don't see how the Utah Jazz can escape being the worst team in the West this year. As my 14th seed in the Western Conference, I have the Sacramento Kings. Now, I'm not gonna lie, before my creation of this video, I had the Kings as, arguably a play-in team. Wow, I don't think I took into consideration just how much better the Western Conference got in this offseason, and just how difficult it is going to be for a team like the Kings without a top 20 player to make the playoffs. I really enjoyed the Sacramento Kings run in 2023. I always like a good underdog story, so when they made the playoffs, I was super ecstatic for that team and that fan base. But the amount of turnover that's happened from that roster to this current day 2025 Sacramento Kings roster is absolutely mind-blowing, and when I really sat down and looked at it, there's hardly any teams in the Western Conference that I can confidently say that the Sacramento Kings will or should be better than this season. Let me start with my problems for the Sacramento Kings. This roster to me just feels very like, hey, we know the best days of this iteration of team is over, but we're still trying to give the fans something to watch. That's kind of how I felt about the Clippers for the last few years, but the Sacramento Kings are just that, but 10 times worse. They're headed into the season with a big 3 of DeMar DeRozan, Zach LaVine, and Domantas Sabonis. These are all 3 good players in their own individual right, but when it comes to sharing the floor together, it's just obvious that these players aren't the right fit for each other, and they're nowhere near as fun to watch as they were in 2023, and I really don't know where the Kings go from here. I know where I would go. I would blow the whole thing up and trade as many people as possible outside of like Keegan Murray and maybe Keon Ellis, but it's easier said than done to trade Zach LaVine's contract, and albeit he is still a pretty productive player, one of the most efficient shooters in the NBA, Domantas Sabonis is still an all-star caliber big man. I'm sure he could get you some real value in a trade. DeMar DeRozan has 2 years remaining on his contract. He's only being paid about $25 million per season though. I'm sure a team like the Bucks or the Heat or just any team looking to take the next step in their respective conferences could maybe look at a DeMar DeRozan trade. In my opinion, there's just not much to be had with this roster. Yes, you can get some nights where maybe everybody goes off on the same night. You get a 40 burger from Zach LaVine, you get 30 and 10 from Sabonis, and you score 120 points and you beat the Lakers one night in the regular season. Like, I'm sure this team has moments like that in them, but when it comes to consistent winning and the ability to fire on all cylinders, I don't think the Kings have that. And while yes, there is talent on this roster, I just don't like the fit of their top 3 guys, and I don't like their lack of depth. You're going to be relying a lot on guys like Nick Clifford, Devin Carter, Maxime Reynolds, just textbook definition unproven players. It's hard for me to have good expectations for this team when there's only 7 to 8 players I even feel comfortable with playing. I will say I do like the addition of Dennis Schroeder. I don't like the contract. It's 3 years, $45 million. That's a bit much, but as far as this season goes, they needed a certified point guard, a guy who can create his own shot, set up the offense, and dish to open teammates. That's Dennis Schroeder. He's going to be solid for at least the first year of this contract. I thought that was a decent signing for them. They're also rumored to be in the market for Russell Westbrook, so I think that just goes to show that they're not exactly in love with their guard rotation. You obviously took a major hit in the playmaking department after the trading of De'Aaron Fox, so you can hope Dennis Schroeder can be at least 50% of what De'Aaron Fox was on 1/4 of the contract. I will say though, I did like their draft. I liked the pick of Maxime Reynolds. I think he's going to be a solid rotational big man for them. Nick Clifford also has some promise on the wing. He should be a good defender and hopefully a good shooter in the league. He's got the size for it, and with the Kings' lack of depth, I would expect him to get plenty of opportunities this year. I also want to see what Devin Carter has in store for year 2. He was drafted for perimeter defense and some facilitation. He didn't get to do much in his rookie year. He only played 36 games, so if he can be significant in their rotation and something for them, then that could be huge for the overall outlook of this team. But I unfortunately don't believe his ceiling is all too high, and if I had to make a bet, the Sacramento Kings are likely to be sellers at the trade deadline. This hurts to say because I feel I've become attached to the Sacramento Kings over the last few years, but I unfortunately have them back as one of the worst teams in the Western Conference this year as the 14th seed. But if they finished higher than this and even pushed for a play-in spot, I would not be shocked whatsoever. As my 13th seed in the Western Conference, I have the Phoenix Suns. For me, this team is, I'm gonna have to see it to believe it. I don't believe in a Jalen Green, Devin Booker backcourt. I don't really like the idea of Devin Booker starting point guard full time. That's really not his role. I think Devin Booker is best utilized obviously as a 2 guard. He's best utilized when he has a guy like Ricky Rubio or Chris Paul delivering him the ball. I just don't really like Devin Booker and Jalen Green taking the ball up the court and setting up the offense every play. The thought of that just doesn't excite me as far as winning is concerned, and that's not to say that Devin Booker and Jalen Green are not good playmakers, but you would get the best out of these guys in different situations, and unfortunately the Suns are just not the right situation for what these guys need to be successful. And by the way, I don't know if Jalen Green is playing any point guard minutes. That entire rant could have just been irrelevant, but I believe he could get some. But the Devin Booker point still stands, and the backup guard to D-Book is Colin Gillespie, who, no offense to him, is not exactly my ideal backup point guard, and hopefully not the only true point guard on my roster, which is actually the case for the Phoenix Suns. I'll give one more shout out to Kaman Maluaj. I really liked him coming out of Duke. Should be a solid defender, rim protector, shot blocker day one. And Rasheer Fleming has real defensive potential. I'd really like to see him on the wing next to Ryan Dunn. That could be a clamp duo. I also think the addition of Dylan Brooks really went under the radar. I don't like him starting at power forward for them. Again, just another player that isn't being utilized correctly. He's going to be one of their more reliable shooters on the floor. I think he'll get a lot more offensive touches this year than he usually does. And he's also probably the best perimeter defender on this team. I just think he has a lot of work cut out for him. If I expect trades from any roster in the league, it's got to be the Phoenix Suns. Nothing on here really looks permanent or like there's really any foundation for the future. The roster looks like a bunch of random players just thrown into a generator. It just doesn't look very cohesive. There's a lack of consistent 3-point shooting outside of Grayson Allen and Devin Booker, who, by the way, Grayson Allen doesn't get his flowers powers. Last season shot 42.5% from 3. Year before that, 46% from 3. One of the best shooters in the league. We're gonna have to respect him. But yeah, other than that, just not entirely too optimistic about the Suns roster. They do have the talent to win some games. Again, this is another team that if they push for a play-in spot, I wouldn't even be surprised. But as of right now, that is not my expectations for this team. As my 12th seed in the Western Conference, I have the Portland Trail Blazers. This team also was ranked 12th in the conference last year, so unfortunately in my predictions, I have them standing put. But this is one of the more intriguing teams to me, especially now that they added Damian Lillard post his buyout. In the offseason, the Trail Blazers traded Anthony Simons and a second-round pick for Drew Holiday. This trade shocked me at the time, and I'm not gonna lie, months later, it still kind of shocks me. Because what about the 3 years remaining on his contract? What about the fit next to Scoot, with them both not being great shooters in the backcourt? You also add Damian Lillard to that guard room just to make it even more complicated. And let's just say, what happens if Scoot next year averages 20 points and 7 assists? He really breaks out and shows that he's the future star of this team. Okay, well then what do you do with Damian Lillard, who you just signed to a 3-year deal and you're allowing him to rehab this year? Do you just bench him? I would assume not. He's a franchise legend, so you're probably going to start him next to Scoot. But the defense in that backcourt, unless Scoot Henderson does a complete 180, would be absolutely atrocious, while you also have one of the best perimeter defenders in Drew Holiday on your bench, while making over $30 million per season. So I won't lie, the construction of this roster does make me scratch my head a bit, but that is a problem we won't have to worry about this year with Damian Lillard being injured, so I'm not even going to discuss that anymore. The biggest story of the Trailblazers offseason so far was them drafting center Young Hansen. This is another baby Jokic archetype, and I'm not going to get into much of what I think about him. I haven't seen too much film of him, but I've watched some Summer League highlights, and I see what everyone else sees. There's great playmaking potential with this guy, which is extremely rare in centers, and he's also a good size and 7'1". He could be one of the best players on this team 3 years from now. He certainly could, but I don't expect him to get too much run in his rookie season. The Trailblazers, need I remind you, last season also drafted another center in the lottery, Donovan Clingan, who has insane defensive potential. I'm really excited to see him in a starting role. There's another question there. What if Donovan Clingan breaks out this year? Then what do you do about the center you just drafted this year? There's a lot of overlap in this roster, and that can be seen as a good thing or a bad thing, depending on how you look at it. But that's kind of the story for every position. You have one of the more underrated players in the league in Toumani Camara, a phenomenal perimeter defender who actually showed some offensive capabilities this year, averaging 11 points per game and almost shot 38% from 3. Denny Avdija, who was drafted by the Wizards in 2020, who was traded to the Trailblazers last year, had a career year averaging 17, 7, and 4. And at the tail end of the season, he was playing like an all-star level guy. So you'd like to expand on that and see what he can be in an even larger role this year. Shaedon Sharpe is one of those guys who's awaiting in the shadows to break out. He would probably be one of the more valued young players in the league if he could just figure out his jump shot. Last season, he shot a career worst 31% from 3, but he did average a career high 18.5 points per game this year, and he's also a super versatile offensive weapon. He's got crazy hops. If there's any time for Shaedon Sharpe to put it all together and prove that he's up there with the young guys in the league, it's got to be now, considering he's due for his rookie extension. If he wants his bag, he should ball out, and I would fully expect him to. You also got Jeremy Grant and Robert Williams still on the roster. I've dunked on Jeremy Grant a lot in the past. He's one of the worst contracts in the league, and his value is only tanking every season. If you can get a single second-round pick or just anything of value out of him, I would do it now. I wouldn't want to be stuck paying Jeremy Grant $35 million when he's 34 years old. Robert Williams, a solid paint defender and lob catcher. He should have some value on the trade market. I think you can get a team like the Warriors or the Lakers to throw you a bone for him. But yeah, another team that I like that I unfortunately had to rank at the lower half of the Western Conference. Lots of talent on this team, and I'm very intrigued to see how they all work together this year and their improvements. I will be watching Trailblazers basketball whether they're good or bad, but for right now, I have them as the 12th seed in the Western Conference. As my 11th seed in the Western Conference, I have the New Orleans Pelicans. Now, realistically, you could make an argument that any teams I've ranked outside of Utah in this video are better than the Pelicans. I know someone's gonna be like, how could you rank the Pelicans over the Trailblazers or the Suns or the Kings? Like, the disparity between these teams is not wide at all. In the Western Conference, the 14th seed to like the 9th seed is basically just a toss-up. But the reason I have the Pelicans above those other teams is because I liked their offseason more than everybody else's. In this offseason, the Pelicans traded CJ McCollum's expiring contract for Jordan Poole, a move that was heavily reported, but I feel like people don't really understand like the significance of this move. move. DeJounte Murray, who they traded for last year, did not play great for them and then went down with a season-ending injury. So he obviously won't be ready for the start of the season, but you replace him with a guy like Jordan Poole, who has a much higher offensive ceiling. He's like a dynamic shot creator on the perimeter. That's just something that this team really needed, because last year they were giving Elfrid Payton starting point guard minutes, and the shooting on this team is also rough at times. Herb Jones isn't exactly a sniper whatsoever. Trey Murphy has a clip, but his percentages aren't always great. Jose Alvarado isn't much of a reliable shooter. Obviously Zion Williamson isn't either. So you add a guy like Jordan Poole, who shot 38% from 3 last year on high volume, and I think he ups the level for this team offensively. The Pelicans also got busy in this year's draft, where they landed Jeremiah Fears and traded their next year's pick for Derek Queen. Now, I don't know how I feel about that move. It is definitely ballsy, but at the end of the day, if Derek Queen is a good player and the Pelicans don't give up like a top 10 pick next year, then I think it's fine. But his impact isn't going to be felt on day one, considering you drafted Yves Missi last year, who actually played really solid in his rookie year. There's something to build on there. And they also signed Kevon Looney in free agency. So I don't really know where the minutes are for Derek Queen and why you would trade your next year's pick for him. If you're planning on starting Yves Missi for the future and you were going to bring in Kevon Looney in free agency, it's just stacked right there, and I don't really know if that was the best possible move. But at the end of the day, there's no going back. Move's done. It's all on Derek Queen to prove the team right. Obviously, no need to mention Zion Williamson's injury history. I mean, we know, like, he was projected to be a superstar level player. He is absurdly good when healthy. He just simply can't stay healthy. Last season, Zion only played 30 games, but, you know, he averaged 25 points per game, 7 rebounds, 5 assists. That's just what Zion does. When he's on the court, it is a spectacle. But the question is always, will he be healthy? And that's why I have the Pelicans just barely missing the play-in. Truthfully, if Zion plays 70 or more games like he did in 2023, then I think the Pelicans could be out one of the teams I rank above them. But I'm also taking a chance ranking them this high in general, because if Zion only plays 25, 30 games this year, then hell, they could be the 14th seed. I'm relying on them to be at least moderately healthy, and if they can do so, then I think they would be very close in the play-in race. Now, for my first play-in team of the video, I have the Memphis Grizzlies as the 10th seed in the West. You could argue that the Grizzlies got worse this offseason, and I'm about to argue that right now pretty much. You traded one of your top 3 guys in Desmond Bane this offseason for KCP, Cole Anthony, and first-round picks, which I actually really like this move for the Grizzlies, because you get 4 first-round picks, and you get off the large Desmond Bane money. There's just no sense in paying Triple J, Ja, and Bane to hopefully be a top 6 seed in the West and lose in the first round. The roster just didn't have a very high ceiling, and although they were injured, I felt like big changes were coming to this team post the absolute beatdown the Thunder gave them in round 1. I knew there was no way they were going to pay Jaren Jackson Jr. a max contract, keep Desmond Bane around for $40+ million a year, and Ja Morant, and re-signing Santi Aldama. Like, I knew something big was going to happen, and albeit it did. But unfortunately, they will feel the ramifications of this move in this upcoming season. Desmond Bane was a lights-out shooter for the Grizzlies, a solid defender, a 20 points per game scorer, and a big focal point of the offense. That is now gone. And you're replacing that production with Kentavious Caldwell-Pope, who's not a bad defender by any means, but he certainly did not produce in Orlando like he did in Denver defensively. And offensively, his splits fell off a cliff. He only averaged 7 points per game last year. He did shoot 44% from 3 post All-Star break, but that only rounded out to 34% on the year, which goes to show how bad he started off the year for the Magic. Everyone kind of likes to dunk on the Grizzlies because they're a successful roster. They managed to win games, but they're not respected. They're not feared by any other Western Conference teams. But I think people are forgetting that they won 48 games last season. And yes, they did lose Desmond Bane, but in the offseason, they drafted Cedric Coward. You signed Ty Jerome in free agency, and you're going to see the improvements of a second-year Jalen Wells. You're going to see Scottie Pippen Jr.'s improvement. And you also have guys that were underwhelming last year, but still have promise and could make an impact on this team, like Gigi Jackson and Vince Williams Jr. This team's season kind of goes how Ja Morant's season goes. Towards the tail end of their season last year, they actually fired their coach, Taylor Jenkins. And a big reason as to why Taylor Jenkins was fired is because he wasn't utilizing Ja Morant. While their offensive rating was still good and it did score points, their scheme was just very convoluted, and you didn't see the best possible version of Ja Morant. He had his lowest scoring season since 2020. But if you bring in a new coach, a new staff to utilize him properly, get him back to his 2021 form where he was averaging 27 and 7, make some moves at the trade deadline with the contracts of Brandon Clark and KCP, get you a real player, and hell, this team could go on a run and be a top 8 seed in the West, but it's not something I can actually count on. I'm gonna have to see it to believe it with their new coaching staff, and obviously Ja Morant's health. He's only played 59 games in the last last 2 years, but I feel like Ja Morant is being overlooked. He's got to take this disrespect to heart and get back to form. And I might not think the Grizzlies will be great this year, but if you see improvement in Zach Edey, Jaren Jackson Jr. continuing to be one of the best defenders in the NBA, and put the ball back in Ja Morant's hands, I think this team could have a very successful 2026-27 season. For my number 9th seed in the Western Conference, I have the San Antonio Spurs. The Spurs last season finished 34-48, and while yes, their season was a failure, it ultimately became a success when you land the number 2 overall pick in the draft and then get Dylan Harper. So now this team has De'Aaron Fox, Stephon Castle, and Dylan Harper in the guard room. 3 explosive dynamic players to pair alongside Victor Wembanyama. I would like to give a shout out to their second first-round pick of the draft, Carter Bryant. He looks like a stud out the gate, a 6'8" lengthy defender. If he can find a consistent three-point shot, then he is going to be great in the league, and he is going to be perfect for the Spurs. This may be a hot take, but I believe the San Antonio Spurs have Western Conference Finals potential as a team. So you might be wondering why I rank them as a play-in team. It's just simply because this team does not have a proven track record of regular season wins with Victor Wembanyama, and that's not to say that is Wemby's fault whatsoever. Obviously, the roster has not been fully constructed around him until pretty much now when you land your star duo in De'Aaron Fox. So I'm not going to blame him for the Spurs being bad this year or in his rookie year. Like, the team was bad. But I simply cannot right now fully count on Victor Wembanyama to lead this team to a top 8 seed in the Western Conference. I don't need to sit here and be like, hey, Victor Wembanyama is super good. He's going to be one of the best players in the league. Like, duh. He's 7'3". He moves like a guard. He's going to be one of the best defenders in NBA history. And he's already arguably the best defender in the NBA currently. But I simply can't put the Spurs above any of the remaining 8 teams in the video. However, I do have them making the play-in for the first time in the Victor Wembanyama era, so I think they will have a successful season. I really like their offseason. The Dylan Harper pick was obviously a no-brainer. He's going to be excellent for you. You traded for Kelly Olynyk, who's a solid backup stretch big, and you also signed Luke Kornet to a 4-year deal, and I can only imagine the Victor Wembanyama, Luke Kornet lineups. That's just going to be a nightmare for other teams defensively. You're bringing back Harrison Barnes on his expiring contract, who played excellent for you last season, shooting 43% from 3. And you also still have Devin Vassell, who doesn't get talked about much, but averaged 16 points per game last year, and the season before last almost cracked 20 points per game, and he's only 24 years old. He's an excellent player, and with De'Aaron Fox now entering the backcourt, Devin Vassell is going to kill this year. But yeah, I think if all things go correctly, De'Aaron Fox and Victor Wembanyama, that duo could lead the Spurs to being one of the best teams in the Western Conference. But I want to stand pat on the Spurs. I don't want to jump the gun too quickly. I think they will be a play-in in the Western Conference and a very respectable team this year. As my 8th seed in the Western Conference, I have the Dallas Mavericks. I think the Mavericks will be a play-in team simply because Kyrie Irving is injured. I don't know exactly when he's coming back, but he is going to miss a large portion of the season, and I'm kind of counting on the Mavericks to get some wins in the meantime, and I really think they will. D'Angelo Russell is about the best replacement for Kyrie you could get for only $6 million a season, so he should be a nice offensive weapon for them. But the depth on this team is just too insane to ignore, in my opinion. You could argue the Mavericks won this offseason when they landed the number 1 overall pick in the draft and drafted Cooper Flagg, one of the most highly touted prospects since Zion Williamson. He should be a good to great defender day 1. I don't expect his offensive game to be fully polished and him come out of the season averaging 20 points per game. I think he'll have to ease into things, but I think he will find his groove and average a cool 15 to 17 points per game with good defense alongside one of the best defenders in the world in Anthony Davis at the 4. And beside Anthony Davis, you have Derek Lively and Daniel Gafford, one of the best center rotations in the league. This team is just so dominant on the defensive side of the ball. You also have Najee Marshall hounding the perimeter, one of the most underrated signings of last year's free agency, a steal for the Mavericks, and one of the most elite shooters in NBA history. Obviously not what he once was, but still a very productive player in Klay Thompson. I can make this Mavericks segment 10 minutes if I really wanted to. There's just so much to go over with this team. You still have Max Christie, who you acquired in the Luka trade, who balled out for the Mavericks last season. You also have PJ Washington, who's on his expiring contract. Do you trade him? Do you keep him? If you plan on keeping him around, that's just another great 30 minutes per game player. And then obviously towards the later end of the season, you have Kyrie Irving coming back. I cannot wait to see him and Anthony Davis, their connection. But this is arguably the deepest, or I'll just say one of the deepest teams in the NBA. They are missing the star power with Kyrie Irving out, but I think their defense will keep them afloat in the regular season. But the Mavericks cannot be ignored. I know they traded Luka Doncic, arguably the stupidest trade in NBA history, but we cannot deny that the Mavericks' current iteration of roster is still extremely good and could be extremely dangerous come postseason time. But as of right now, I have the Mavericks as the 8th seed, a play-in team in the Western Conference. For my 7th seed in the West, I have the Golden State Warriors. I'm going to keep this one relatively short. I have the Warriors over the Mavs and the other teams ranked below them because of Steph Curry. You have one of the best players in the world on your team. The Mavericks will be missing Kyrie Irving. No teams I ranked below them have a player of Steph Curry's caliber. So obviously I expect him to carry this roster to some level of regular season success. But for me, it's really hard to ignore just how bad this Warriors roster is. You did trade for Jimmy Butler at the deadline last year, and you obviously still have one of the most impactful players in the league in Draymond Green on your team. But the depth outside of that looks like Buddy Hield, Brandon Pajemski, Quentin Post, Moses Moody, Guy Santos, Terran Armstrong. It's just not great. It's really not. And this team has shown no effort, no initiative to really advance the roster in this offseason. They have quite literally not made a trade or signed a single player since the start of free agency. And obviously the reason as to why that is the Jonathan Kuminga sweepstakes. Jonathan Kuminga does not want to come back to Golden State. They have not utilized him properly. They have not given him the chances to succeed. He recognizes that. Everyone else recognizes that. He wants to move on. But the problem is no teams in free agency have cap space right now. So you have to orchestrate a sign and trade, but the Warriors obviously recognize the talent that Jonathan Kuminga is, and they don't just want to let him go for second round picks. They're waiting for an offer that will blow their socks off, and I don't see that offer coming. So I don't know how long they plan on sitting this out, or if Jonathan Kuminga is returning to the Warriors in any way. If he did, I would expect it to be a one-year deal where he can enter free agency next year. But yeah, to be honest, the roster outside of Steph, Jimmy, and Draymond just absolutely sucks. So I'm just counting on them to at least make some moves before the end of the offseason, or just go absolutely ham at the trade deadline. Because with the roster's current construction, if Stephen Curry goes down for a month, this team is a lottery team, simply put. And they cannot afford any lapses in the regular season with how dominant the Western Conference is going to be this year. I still have them as a play-in team. I still think they'll make the playoffs. But as far as being a guaranteed playoff team, that's not the Warriors this year. As the number 6 seed in the Western Conference, I have the Los Angeles Clippers. I have a lot to say about this team. This is one of the most mocked and ridiculed rosters in the NBA for good reason. At the end of the day, they are the Clippers. They've never made the finals. They never won a finals. They've never made a Western Conference finals before 2021. Sorry to any Clippers fans out here watching. I'm also a Clippers fan. That's kind of why I'm going crazy on them. But the Clippers in this offseason drafted Yannick Conan Niederhauser in the first round and Kobe Sanders in the second round. I'm not going to act like I have too much intel on these prospects. I had no idea who Yannick Conan Niederhauser was when he was drafted. But as far as free agency goes and the trade market, I think the Clippers had one of the best off seasons in the NBA. Let's start with the Norman Powell for John Collins trade. A lot of people will tell you that the Clippers downgraded or they're going to suffer offensively due to the loss of Norman Powell. Let me just say it like this. Whatever we lost offensively with Norman Powell going to Miami, we are going to gain back defensively with John Collins. Now, I'm not claiming John Collins is a Draymond Green level-esque defender, but giving Kawhi the ability to play the full-time small forward instead of power forward is going to do wonders for him. He no longer has to guard the Giannis's or the Anthony Davis's or the Zion Williamsons of the world. That gives Kawhi Leonard less defensive responsibility and allows him to tap in more offensively. Last season, he averaged his lowest points per game since 2017, and playing the 4 ultimately did not help his health status. We obviously know Kawhi Leonard is one of the biggest what-ifs in NBA history. His health has held him back in his career, and that's an understatement to say the least, but he is 34 years old. I think it was very smart for the Clippers to upgrade their front court and give Kawhi the freedom to play the 3. Although John Collins is no slouch on offense last year, he shot 40% from 3 and averaged 19 points per game, albeit on one of the worst teams in the league in the Utah Jazz. But you have James Harden, Kawhi Leonard, Bradley Beal, Ivica Zubac. The amount of wide open threes he's going to get, the amount of lobs he's going to catch from Harden and Chris Paul, I expect him to be very productive for the Clippers offensively. And speaking of Chris Paul, the Clippers now have one of the best backup point guards in the league in Chris Paul, who, although being 40 years old, last season played all 82 games and averaged 8 points and 7 assists. He's going to be great off the bench for the Clippers. He's certainly not the defender he used to be, but you pair him up with a Chris Dunn or a Kawhi Leonard, and you obviously have Ivica Zubac manning the paint. He's going to be fine defensively, and he has so many players on the inside to feed, like John Collins, Derrick Jones Jr., Ivica Zubac, Brook Lopez. And Brook Lopez, who the Clippers signed to a 2-year deal in free agency, is now the backup to Ivica Zubac. Last season, Brook Lopez averaged 13 points per game and shot 37% from 3. I really like this pickup for the Clippers. Obviously, Brook Lopez is not the defender he used to be, but the Clippers will not be asking Brook Lopez to play 32 minutes a game like the Bucks were last year. I think he'll be much more effective in a 15 to 18 minutes per game role, and he should give the Clippers some solid production off the bench. They also signed Bradley Beal off his buyout in Phoenix. Bradley Beal has probably been the most shitted shitted on or hated on player over the last like 2 years of the NBA, and it's no secret as to why he had the worst contract in the league, and the Suns ultimately had to buy him out with 2 years remaining on his deal. Last season, he averaged 17 points per game, shooting 50% from the field and 38% from three. Those are productive and solid numbers, but at the end of the day, when you're looked at as a top 3 option on a Phoenix Suns roster with not a lot of depth, I mean, the expectations are simply going to be higher than you can produce for. So ultimately, he signs with the Clippers, and he's their Norman Powell replacement. The offseason worked out perfectly for the Clippers, in my opinion. Bradley Beal is one of the best replacements you could get for Norman Powell in free agency, and he's only making 1/4 of the money. You also have guys like Nicholas Batum, Derrick Jones Jr., Chris Dunn coming off the bench. This is one of the deeper rosters in the league, and if Kawhi Leonard can stay somewhat healthy and James Harden can have a relative season to what he had last year, I think the Clippers should have no problem being a top 6 seed in the Western Conference. For my 5th seed in the Western Conference, I have the Minnesota Timberwolves. This team in the offseason lost Nickeil Alexander-Walker to the Atlanta Hawks in free agency. I think that's definitely going to put a hole in their depth, but you have guys like Jalen Clark and Terrence Shannon Jr. to emerge. I think given opportunity, they could be very productive for the Timberwolves this year, and I don't want to sit here and act like the Timberwolves lost a star level player and demote them to a play-in team. Last season, they were one of the best teams in the West. I expect it to stay that way. You have the defensive dominance of Rudy Gobert. You also brought back Naz Reid, who had one of his best seasons, and you still have your duo of Jaden McDaniels and Anthony Edwards. I don't need to tell you Anthony Edwards is one of the best offensive players in the league. Last season, he led the league in three-pointers made and shot 40% from three. A historic season for Anthony Edwards, and I don't expect him to get any worse. I expect him to get better, if anything. Better shot selection, more defensive prowess, more playmaking. Speaking of playmaking, that's kind of my only question with the Timberwolves this year. What do they plan on doing with the point guard spot if Robert Dillingham turns out to not be your franchise point guard? And Mike Conley, in his late 30s, probably playing his last season this year on a $9 million expiring contract. He's still a consistent three-point shooter and a good playmaker, but his defense is the easiest to pick on in the starting lineup, and I can't expect a guy pushing 40 to be productive for all 82 games of a season. If they could finesse into getting a point guard on the trade market, I thought Lonzo Ball would have been great for this team. Maybe a DeJounte Murray type guy. A solidified point guard would take this team into one of the top 3 teams in the West, in my opinion. But I'm not going to count out Rob Dillingham yet. This is going to be his prove it season, because with a guy like Anthony Edwards on the roster, obviously you're hoping to compete for championships or Western Conference Finals, and you can't exactly sit around and wait on the development for one of the most important positions in point guard. So I am intrigued to see what route they go there, but I'm expecting a great season from Anthony Edwards, obviously, and similar production from the rest of the team. I still think there are moves to be made with this roster, but I still expect them to be a top 5 seed in the West. As my 4th seed in the Western Conference, I have the Los Angeles Lakers. The Lakers are difficult to rank right now because we obviously know there are moves to be made and moves that will be made. You have Dalton Knecht, Rui Hachimura, Jared Vanderbilt, Maxi Kleber, Gabe Vincent, all players that could be traded, and that makes up about $45 million, so you could really go out there and get yourself a proven player or two. I think this roster needs another perimeter defender, another wing, and a backup center. If the Lakers can get Matisse Thybulle and Robert Williams from the Trailblazers, or any combination of that sort from another team, and I think that makes a world of a difference. I'm not very confident in this team, currently relying on guys like Jared Vanderbilt and Marcus Smart, but at the end of the day, this team employs Luka Doncic, a top 5 player in the NBA. Him being on your roster alone, I think, will lead you to some semblance of regular season success. You also have LeBron James, arguably the greatest player of all time, on your roster. He brings basketball IQ, playmaking, three-point shooting, defensive versatility, and I think there's no way the Lakers would just squander this year of Luka and LeBron. This is LeBron's last year on his contract. The Lakers have picks to trade. They have assets. If they don't go out and upgrade this roster, that's just disrespectful, if anything. A Nick Claxton or Andrew Wiggins or a Trey Murphy. All this roster needs is 2 more rotation players for me to be confident in their chances. I like the signing of DeAndre Ayton, especially for the price. A 2-year, $16 million deal is a no-brainer for a guy of his caliber, but you still need rim protection at that spot. DeAndre Ayton is a solid rebounder, and he can make a hook shot. He can sink a floater, but he's certainly no incredible defender down low, and guys like Jokic and AD are going to be difficult to stop for the Lakers this year. But you have Luka Doncic and LeBron James. You have the assets to make a big-time trade, or maybe even a smaller trade. The roster doesn't need much, just perimeter defense, some three-point shooting, and a backup center that's more reliable than Jackson Hayes. This roster is going to be completely different come trade deadline time, so it's hard for me to rank them right now, but I have them as a top 4 seed in the West. As my number 3 seed in the Western Conference, I have the Houston Rockets. If there's a biggest winners of the offseason debate, the Rockets have to be up there. In this offseason, they traded Dillon Brooks, Jalen Green, and their first-round pick to the Phoenix Suns for Kevin Durant. And they also signed a 3-and-D wing in free agency, Dorian Finney-Smith. This is one of the best rosters in the NBA, and if everyone stays relatively healthy, I don't think there's a chance in hell this team falls out of the top 3 in the West. The Rockets were the 2nd seed in the West last year. Unfortunately, I have to demote them 1 spot, but obviously the Kevin Durant trade was huge for them. That takes this team to another level offensively. You bring in one of the greatest shot creators and scorers in NBA history, who is still a solid defender, although he's approaching his 40s. I don't think he'll disrupt the team's defensive identity at all. They also brought back Steven Adams on a 3-year contract. His 2-man game with Alperen Şengün last year was super dominant. And the biggest domino of all for this team, the development of Amen Thompson. Amen, already one of the most disruptive defenders in the league. If he can just turn his offensive game up, work on his 3-point shot, become a more polished playmaker, and you're looking at an absolute star on your hands. He's one of the best athletes in the NBA, arguably the most. He's also 6'7" at point guard. Just an absolute spectacle of a player. And if he can reach his full ceiling, then a championship could be in store for the Houston Rockets. But he's another guy I don't want to jump the gun on yet. I want to see his development. I think he will get better at shooting the ball, but I have to see it first. You also have a 2nd year for Reed Shepherd, who only played 12 minutes per game last year. Hopefully he gets some more opportunity to prove why he was one of the top picks in last year's draft. The team also signed Clint Capella in free agency to a 3-year, $21 million contract. He could be a trade piece at the deadline, maybe get you some assets back, or he could just be the best 3rd-string center in the NBA for you. I mean, that works as well. But a team with Alperen Şengün, a rising star in this league, alongside Kevin Durant, paired with Fred VanVleet, Amen Thompson, Tari Eason, Jabari Smith. This is another one of the most deep teams in the NBA, and this squad is going to be an absolute nightmare to match up against in the playoffs. As my 2nd seed in the Western Conference, I have the Denver Nuggets. Last season, the Nuggets had an average season, winning 50 games. I only say average because you have Nikola Jokic, arguably the best player in the world, on your roster, along with Jamal Murray, Aaron Gordon. But things weren't easy for the Nuggets last year. They fired their head coach only 2 weeks before the playoffs. They weren't seeing much production out of their bench, and they also had a huge hole at backup center. In the non-Jokic minutes, this team looked absolutely dreadful. But those criticisms were vanquished in this offseason for the Denver Nuggets. They traded Dario Saric for Jonas Valanciunas, one of the best backup centers in the NBA. He can come off the bench and give you a productive 15 minutes per game, and that's going to be huge for the Nuggets and Nikola Jokic. That'll save him some gas. Also, trading Michael Porter Jr. and a 1st-round pick for Cameron Johnson was a great move for them. MPJ's flaws were obvious to everyone, and Cameron Johnson's just a more seamless fit in that lineup. You also have a homecoming with Bruce Brown. He comes back to your team in free agency on a 1-year minimum deal. That's a steal for the Nuggets. If he stays healthy, he's going to come off the bench and give them productive minutes, and obviously with Jokic, the sky could be the limit for Bruce Brown. Maybe he goes off again in Denver and then goes out and gets another big contract. You never know. You also signed Tim Hardaway Jr., who was one of the more efficient shooters in the league last year. He was a huge pickup, also on a minimum deal. The Nuggets absolutely smoked free agency, and I am super happy for this team. I was worried that they were going to fumble the bag with Jokic. I heard the GM in a press conference talking about the possibility of trading Jokic in the future if they don't tighten up. Well, needless to be said, they tightened up and they built a good roster, so shout out to them. I also want to see Deron Holmes in his first official season in the NBA. Last year, he didn't play a minute due to an injury in the summer league. You have your star duo in Jokic and Jamal Murray, a proven championship formula between these two. You get a more upgraded roster around them with better shooting, more depth, also more consistency from your young players, and I think this team will be back as the 2nd best team in the Western Conference this year. And as my 1st seed in the Western Conference, this shouldn't be a surprise to anyone. It is the OKC Thunder. Now, there's not a lot to talk about with this team, really. They just won the championship last year. A dominant defensive team led by one of the best players in the NBA in Shai Gilgeous-Alexander. With the roster not really changing at all in the offseason, I mean, there's no need to. The championship formula is right there. I have no reason as to believe why the OKC Thunder shouldn't remain as dominant as they were last year. Obviously, yes, with the West improving and teams like the Rockets, the Nuggets, the Clippers getting a lot better in the offseason, that could prove danger to the OKC Thunder. But really, I think they'll be just fine as long as nothing catastrophic happens to this team. As far as injuries go, this team should be back as the best team in the West and a championship favorite. So I still have the Thunder as my best team in the Western Conference, and I don't have a reason to change that. But that is going to wrap it up for this video. This was a bit longer, I will admit, but just got in the groove and talking, and I hope you guys did enjoy the video. If you did, please be sure to hit the like button and subscribe. Like I said in the the intro, I'm just a small channel, just trying to grow. All the support means the world to me. You guys have been killing it lately. I truly appreciate it. But until the next video, I'll see you guys. I'm out. Deuces.